Welcome, everyone. I can see we still have some participants coming in. It's so wonderful. The longer I'm in Delaware, the more familiar names and faces I see. It's so great to be here with all of you today. I think we'll just wait another minute and let people kind of get settled in, and then we'll get started. Hi. Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, it's great to see you.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone. We've got a full schedule packed for our hour today. We want to make sure we give you guys some times to actively engage with some material. So I think we'll get started, and that way if people are still joining, they can just pop in when they get here. So I'm going to share my screen. Steve, I'm having a little trouble sharing my screen. Is it possible for you to try to share yours? We just have to make sure we optimize it for sound and sharing a video. Thank you. Awesome. Thank you. Small technical difficulty, but it looks like we got it under control. So welcome, everybody. I'm so excited to see so many faces here with us today. It really warms my heart that all of you are here to talk and think about how to better support our multilingual learners in the state of Delaware. So we are so excited to share with you today how we can leverage multilingualism within the science of reading framework, specifically for our multilingual learners. Next slide. So I am Christina Budde, assistant professor at the University of Delaware. And with me today, I have Dr. Amendum, a professor at the University of Delaware, and John Kittle, who is a doctoral student also at the University of Delaware.
I'm sorry, everyone. I'm Steve Amendum. I think it's my turn to introduce. For some reason, I've shared my screen, but I have no sound. So I can see Christina talking, but I can't hear. I'm going to reshare the screen in just a second, but while John's introducing himself, I'm Steve Amendum. I'm a professor at the School of Education here at the University of Delaware. I was trying to problem solve before I had to talk, but I will do it in just a second. John, over to you.
Sure. Thanks for having me. So I'm a third-year PhD student in the School of Education in the literacy specialization. I previously taught as a reading interventionist in the Colonial School District, and then got my master's degree in teaching English as a second language. and taught at the English Language Institute at the University of Delaware, beginning reading and writing courses. So thanks so much for having me.
Steve, do you have volume? Okay. Okay, so now we're going to ask for a little bit of participation. So we'd like to learn a little bit about you. So if you go to the next slide, Steve, we're going to try a little activity. It's a poll everywhere. So in the corner of your screen, if you happen to have a cell phone on you and you want to scan that little QR code, or you can go to the polleverywhere.com. Oh, it should be showing. Let's see. Let me just go ahead and try that. You can also go to the pollev.com / Christina Budde, BUD 127, and you'll end up with a map, and you're able to drop a pin on this map to show where your school or office is located. Where are you coming from today? I think it's great to see where everybody is coming from. Is it not working? It's not working. Okay. It's probably because we're not sharing. All right. Let me do this.
Do you want me to reshare, Christina? Or
I think if I share, there we go.
there you go.
This one should work now. Here we go. I see a dot. We must be working. Oh, Laura, did you have a question? I see your hand is raised. Wonderful. All over the state.
Yeah, I see someone from Virginia, so I guess next time we'll have to make our map bigger.
Yes, I guess so. I don't. I just did our state, but I see we have people outside too. Wonderful. Excellent. So I think it's really great to see how many different districts are represented here today, or how many different institutions are represented. I think that really speaks to the unity that we have in Delaware. And I have one more slide for you on Poll Everywhere. So hopefully, let's see. Okay, so in this slide, we wanted to see who is joining us today. I know we have people from many different professional backgrounds, so you may need to scan the code again, or you can go by text or by web. And which of the following best describes your current professional role? We can see. Wonderful. Lots of ESL and ML specialists with us today. Terrific. I know I saw a couple of my students popping in. So a lot of different backgrounds coming together today to really bring our knowledge to form a shared collective community, and we'll be able to take advantage of all of the knowledge that we bring together in a little bit, an activity we have planned later. Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing. Feel free to keep sending in your responses. This is terrific. It's very helpful to know we have, looks like we have just about everybody represented. We have paraprofessionals, administrators, district office, State Department. We've got higher ed. We've got students, bilingual dual immersion teachers here. Oh, this is terrific. Secondary educators, K-5 teachers. Who am I missing? Teacher trainers, professional development specialist. This is terrific. Wonderful. Higher education faculty and staff. Welcome, everybody. Okay, Steve, I'm going to stop sharing mine and hopefully we can get yours back up and running.
Give me just 1 second.
Sure.
And we should be up here in just a second.
Perfect. Well, while Steve is getting our presentation back up, I'll go ahead and share our goals for today's session. We want to have you understand how can you leverage students' home language and how does that fit within the science of reading research for multilingual learners and really supporting English language development. And then our second goal is we'd like for you to be able to learn and engage with 2 evidence-based strategies that draw upon your students' home language and facilitate English language development that you can take with you and implement in your classroom tomorrow if you so wish. Okay.
So as Christina mentioned in the beginning, we are discussing leveraging multilingualism within the science of reading today. And so one of the things that we'd like to begin with is just talking briefly about a shared understanding of the science of reading. When you go into the DDOE website, you see this definition that pops up for the definition related to the science of reading. And you can see here it states that the science of reading is a vast interdisciplinary body of scientifically based research about reading and issues related to reading and writing. And then you can see that the department sort of directs us to the Reading League as well for a full definition of the science of reading. Just a quick poll, you can just put your hand up. Anyone, how many people are familiar with the Reading League or have looked at some of their materials before? So if you take a look at the Reading League, what you'll see is that they expand upon this definition for the science of reading, and they have some resources on their website. If you, the first thing that you'll see is what's on the left here, which is a definition related to the science of reading, which basically states the same kind of thing, and then talks more about the research that's been conducted. They also have a really helpful defining guide, which I've shown here on the right. You can download this for free, and essentially this goes into more detail about many of the issues related to the science of reading. One of the things that you can see in the circles where the guide is open there, WR times LC equals RC, and that refers to the simple view of reading, which is where we're actually going next. So if you have some background, some familiarity with the science of reading and a lot of the work that's been going on for decades, but especially in the last few years, one of the ways the science of reading is conceptualized is using this model, which represents the simple view of reading. And basically what the simple view says is that reading comprehension, or successful and proficient reading, is equal to the product of decoding and linguistic comprehension. And essentially, I think the key point to remember from the simple view is that it's a product, it's times, not plus. And basically what that means is if either one of these, either decoding or linguistic comprehension, is close to 0, then that means a student can't likely read proficiently. And so it highlights the importance of both of these processes. Another idea you may be familiar with related to the science of reading is Scarborough's reading rope. The reading rope expands upon the ideas from the simple view of reading and continues to talk about 2 sets of skills. So rather than decoding and linguistic comprehension, they refer to them as word recognition and language comprehension, but very similar. an idea. And as you can see, I added the components from the simple view model here, so you can see how they easily map together. In elementary grades, we tend to focus sort of, I would say, on the beginnings of the rope in the red box here, right? We really focus on teaching these specific skills to students. So in kindergarten, we're really focused on phonological awareness and decoding, and we work on background knowledge and things like that. And as students move through the elementary grades, our goal is to really help them become more strategic and more automatic with each of those skills, so that all of those skills weave together sort of seamlessly for students to read in a skilled and proficient way. And that instruction continues through middle and high school. One thing that I do want to highlight about the science of reading is that how people read is not the same as how to teach people to read. And so a couple of researchers like Goldenberg and Tim Shanahan have pointed out how the science of how people read is very clear, and we have a very strong evidence base around what are the important processes that people use when they read. The science on how to teach people to read is still evolving. We know some things, but there's lots of things that are still sort of being worked out for the science of teaching reading, I would say. Let me give you a quick example. If you've been following some of the latest research and some of the public discussions, we know that phonemic awareness is a skill that's related to proficient reading and really important for students. But just in the last year and even in the last week, studies are still coming out about the best way to teach PA to students. Is it with letters? Is it without letters? How much time is needed to sufficiently teach PA to students, and so on? And so those are things that we're still learning about. So even though when we talk about the science of reading, often teaching reading is included, it's important to know that we're still learning about the best ways to teach reading. The other thing that I'm sure everyone on this session is familiar with is the 5 pillars of instruction that came from the National Reading Panel. And often the ability to read is conceptualized with these 5 pillars. And we're familiar with those 5 that are listed here in green. More recently, others have proposed oral language development and background knowledge as 2 important additional pillars. And now, as we really shift to consider what the science of reading means for multilingual learners, especially, we want to advocate that each of these 7 pillars must consider both students' home language and English. And this is something that we've found in our own research as well. So the 3 of us actually have undertaken in the last couple of years a huge review study. And our goal was to really think about the science of reading for multilingual learners. And we looked in the research literature systematically for components that were related to successful English reading comprehension for students who are multilingual. And what we found was that there are a number of components in students' native language that also related to successful English reading. So lots of people talk about the English things that you should do to help students become proficient readers. But what we found, which are highlighted here in blue, that things like home language decoding, home language vocabulary, and comprehension work in the home language also were really influential in supporting students' English reading development. In our study, we also looked at what research says about instructional practices for these components for multilingual learners. And the instructional practices that you see here in green were related to that linguistic comprehension part of the simple view. We found that these particular instructional practices, preview and review text, introducing new words, using cognates and dual language books, those all were supportive of developing English vocabulary. In purple, we highlight the relationship for decoding, how teaching decoding skills in home language can really help facilitate decoding in English. And the strategies that you see on the right in blue were strategies that included home language to really facilitate English reading comprehension. And so what we found was that there's clear evidence about the importance of using home language to facilitate English reading for multilingual learners. What we want to point out is that it's this home language, these home language factors that are often not talked about in the science of reading. And today, we're going to really focus in on thinking about how home language can help facilitate. The other thing we want to just mention is that the findings from this study and what we're talking about today really align with the DDOE Multilingual Learner Strategic Plan. If we look at priority 3, which is about developing a shared awareness of the value of multilingualism, goal 1 really hits home how we want to emphasize the value of multilingualism as an asset and focus on home language as a valuable resource. Whoops, wrong way. Sorry. And so as we think about guidance that comes from the research for how to think about leveraging home language use during instruction, we want to just stress 3 points as a framework before we get into some of the more practical parts of our talk today. One is to align instruction. And so it's really important for teachers who share students who are multilingual learners, who teach them in different settings or different times during the day, to have time to talk and plan so that their content and their English language development instruction are closely aligned. One way to do this is through our second point here, which is to provide ELD either within the context of the core ELA curriculum or at least closely related to the content of the ELA curriculum. That way, ESL and classroom teachers can really get the most bang for their buck as they're working with students around that content and language development. But the third point that we always want to raise is sort of a cautionary point. I don't know if that's quite the right word, but we always want to make sure when teachers are collaborating that ESL teachers are considered as the experts in English language development that they are, and not as an assistant to the classroom or content teacher. And so the idea is for both professionals to come together and leverage the expertise that each brings to really support multilingual students. So as we're going to transition in just a second to thinking about, about 2 evidence-based instructional practices that actually use multilingual learners' home language as an asset. We're going to talk about cognate instruction, and we're also going to talk about a strategy called preview, view, and review. And I'm going to turn it over to John, who's going to kick it over and get us started talking about cognates.
All right, thanks, Steve. So before we talk about cognate instruction, it's important to kind of understand what are cognates, right? So cognates are words in different languages that share similar pronunciations, spelling, and meaning. So we have some examples here in English and Spanish, animal in English and animal in Spanish, family, familia, center, centro, class, clase. And then we also have some examples in English and French. I don't know any French, so I'm not going to try that right now. Steve, you could go to the next slide. So the research related to cognate instruction really comes from this idea of positive language transfer. And this is the idea that multilingual learners do not need to discover all linguistic concepts twice. So with cognate awareness, which is the ability to use cognates in the first language as a tool for understanding a second language like English, there's evidence that this knowledge is associated with higher English reading comprehension. There's also research that shows that explicit or intentional instruction, cognate instruction, supports English vocabulary development as students are using both the sound and print to make the connection between words. Okay, so how do we identify cognates to teach? So we're going to go through a couple of steps of how you can actually do this in practice. And the first step is to identify the essential concepts or key vocabulary of the lesson that you're working on. After you've done that, the second step is obviously identifying cognates. So you can use your knowledge of Spanish and French if you have it, right? Maybe you studied it in high school or college. You can also consult Google Translate. You could reach out to bilingual community members, right? Teachers, staff, and parents. Or you can consult lists of common cognates. There's a bunch of lists online, and we're actually going to share a list of resources shortly. And then you could also consult with students themselves, right? Students can be experts, and this can really promote agency, motivation, and community building. But we must beware of the false cognate, right? So false cognates or false friends are words that may sound the same, but they are not related. So here are some examples with English and Spanish, right? So in English, we have the word once, and in Spanish, once, right? 11. Asistir is actually to attend. Ropa, right, is clothes. And then embarazada is actually pregnant. So this really highlights the importance of using those dictionaries to make sure, just because the word looks the same, to check to make sure that the meaning is actually similar. Okay, so when you're planning to teach cognates, right, we've identified the essential concepts or key vocabulary. Then you identify cognates. The third step is to determine if the word is concrete or abstract. So concrete words are words that are have tangible qualities or characteristics, and we can really experience them through our five senses. So, right, we can look at our desk, we can touch our desk, the classroom, a moldy pickle. Thanks, Christina. That's kind of gross. And then we also have abstract words, right? Abstract words are less easily imagined and less easily experienced through those senses, like kindness, love, or an idea. So the reason that this is important is because research has shown that second language learners acquire those abstract words later than concrete words, with more difficulty and with less retention. Okay, so once you've identified whether the words are abstract or concrete, the research has really shown that those abstract words you're going to want to pre-teach, whereas with the concrete words, you can address them during instruction and reading. And I want to highlight that they still need to be taught, right? They just don't necessarily have to be pre-taught. So how do we put this in practice? So we're going to look at a bookworms lesson from grade 3. And this lesson is on the Constitution of the United States. And this is from a unit where the objective is why and how the Constitution was written. So here's kind of a summary of that lesson. So you have the introduction and how you would address the text structure. You have some key vocabulary. So as you're looking at this and as you're looking at the book, you start to think about, what are those key concepts? What are the key vocabulary? Okay, so here's how we walk through those steps, right? So the key content that we identified as we looked through this lesson was that the Constitution is a paper with power and rules. And we thought the key vocabulary really was government and constitution. So then we thought about, are there potential cognates? So constitución, papel, poder, el gobierno are all cognates. And then we also thought about that third step, right? Are these words abstract or are they concrete? Because remember, that's going to determine maybe how we approach teaching these. So with constitution, government, and power, those are really abstract words that we are going to want to pre-teach. Whereas papel or paper is something that we can kind of briefly instruct while reading. Okay, so here's a pre-teaching example. But before I begin, I just want to highlight that in ESL or content classrooms, right, we're constantly asking our students to draw upon what they know to make sense or meaning in English. And that's kind of how we approach cognates. So here in this example, right, you could say, this is the Constitution of the United States. In Spanish, there's a cognate for that word. And then you could say, it says what the government can and cannot do. And government also has a cognate. Good. Okay, great, thanks. So then you might say something like, the Spanish word for constitution is constitución, and the Spanish word for government is gobierno. These words are cognates. They're spelled similarly and they sound very similar. Let's look at constitution and constitución. I notice that the first part of each word is identical, right? And then you might underline that to show them that. Even the suffix "tion" is very similar to "tion" in Spanish. I can use what I know in Spanish to help me read English words, especially when I see that suffix in English, and it's a lot like those "tion" words I know in Spanish, like educación and acción. Then you can ask them what they notice about government, right? So you kind of modeled it with constitution, but then you can kind of step back and see if they can kind of go through those steps, and of course support them as needed. Okay, and then another way that you could do this is you can take a sentence from the reading and you can actually embed those Spanish words and then read that sentence, and then you can highlight those similarities between the words, like I did previously. And another strategy that you can use while you're doing this is having a cognate chart, right? Where you're filling in the words in English and you're filling them in Spanish, and maybe you're highlighting those parts of the words that are similar, right? So you can see the underlined parts and then those suffixes as well. And this is something you can display in the classroom and have as a resource for future teaching, something that you can keep adding to. Okay, so we talked about how to teach abstract words, but we also need to teach those concrete words, right, during reading. So it's really important that you model and provide explicit instruction. So in this example, when we're looking at this lesson, that first page of the chapter, when you're reading this page, you might say something like, I noticed this word, and then you point to paper. This reminded me of a Spanish word. And you can ask your students if it looks or sounds like a word they know in Spanish. Some of your students may know that papel is paper in Spanish, and they might say that. And you can add it to the cognate chart, and you can, again, point out the similarities in the word. So you may underline the first 4 letters. And you can say, if I didn't know the word paper in English, I could use my Spanish to help me. Okay, so here are 3 helpful tips. So keeping a running list of the cognates for each unit or lesson, and this really could be in the chart that you create. Keeping a list of resources for each unit you teach and building and adding to those each time you teach. Obviously, the first time you teach something is never perfect, right? But we can keep learning and keep building from that. And then sharing your resources with colleagues, right? So they may have additional ways to think about pre-teaching these abstract cognates or during reading activities as well. So it's, this importance of collaborating. All right, so let's give this a try. So I'd like you all to think about an upcoming lesson that you might have. And in the chat, I believe Christina has posted some resources in a Google document. And then there's a second Google document that's editable, where you can share your own resources maybe as you're thinking about this. And remember those 4 key steps, right? You're going to want to identify essential concepts or key vocabulary of the lesson, identify the cognates, determine if the word is concrete or abstract, and then plan your instruction, pre-teaching those abstract words or addressing during instruction the concrete words. So Christina, do you know how we're doing? How much time we want to?
I think we can spend the next 5 minutes if everyone just wants a little bit of time kind of exploring some of these links that we provided. So in that first link I just shared, you'll find it's a view only form, and it kind of sets you up with some different options that you can click on, and it takes you to some cognate resources that we've started to compose to share with you. then the second link that I shared with you, you can actually edit and add to that document. So we would love if we can share our expertise, since all of us are bringing in different areas that we can all add to this document. You can add, if you look at that document, you'll see cognate instruction. If you know of online translation apps, you can share with us. If you have a list of common cognates, we'd love for you to share them with us. New York City has a relationship with NYU, and they've created some really fabulous lists of cognates, including Haitian Creole, which I know in Delaware, we have a lot of Haitian Creole speakers. So I think that would be a great resource. So that's on there for you to check out, as well as Spanish English resources and French English. And then we've also created a table. If you scroll down to page 2, I think we're on now. If you have resources to specific curricula that you're using at your grade level, we'd love for you to add so that we can then if we build this, you can continue to build a resource or a toolbox that you can come back to and share with one another and draw upon our own expertise. So I'll stop talking and give everybody just a few minutes to kind of play around with that, and then we'll dive into our second strategy that we're going to share. These are good questions. It's wonderful to see all of the ideas being added to our shared document. I know we have a heavy usage right now, so you may not be able to add to the document currently, but you'll have access to this document until well after our presentation. It won't go away. So I hope that you continue to access this document and to build upon it, because I think we learn so much, especially since so many of us are bilingual speakers. We can share our wealth of linguistic knowledge that we can bring to this group. So please continue to add to this. I'm really excited to see all of the different curricula being represented and thinking about where you are in your units and how you might even be able to start thinking about cognates this week or next week in your instruction. We also had a few questions in the chat, and I see Steve was responding to some, and I was trying to jump in there. So if we have some time at the end, we'll also try to answer any questions you might have. But if you want to put them in the chat, and we'll try to jump in there when we can. But for time, I think we're going to go ahead and move on to our second strategy. Sounds good? Okay. Okay. All right. So the second strategy we want to share with you today is the preview, view, review. So in 2009, Freeman and Freeman shared this strategy, which is a really useful strategy for including both English and students' home languages. And unlike cognate instruction, where the language needs to be shared with English to have cognates, or to be similar to English to have cognates, we can really do this second strategy with any language that our students might be speaking, such as Arabic or Mandarin Chinese, that don't necessarily have cognates with English. So this preview, view, review strategy allows you to build upon students' background when reading or introducing new topics or new texts. And for multilingual learners to build a strong foundation, they really must do so in the language that they feel most comfortable using. And for many of them, that is their home language. So building background with home language support simply means using the students' languages to help prepare them for success in both content as well as language learning in English. So Selleck and Seltzer built upon the Freeman's original strategy, and it included having students preview the topic first in their home language, then viewing the topic or the text in English, and going back and reviewing the topic or text back in the home language, so we can build the connections between the first and second language. So let's talk a little bit about each of those. We'll break them down a bit. So the research shows us that when we use home language and English to build background on a topic, it deepens your students' understanding of both concepts and information. And it really allows you to meet those grade level content standards that we want students to be successful in meeting. Also, research has shown that building background use in the home language and English helps multilingual learners prepare for the different modalities of reading, writing, and speaking about different topics and themes. So how do you teach this strategy? The first thing is you will need to, as the instructor, identify the most important background information that students will need. So you want to ask yourself, similar to cognate instruction, what do students already know about this topic? How can I get them to tap into this knowledge? What is the big picture of the unit or topic? And how can I help my students to see this big picture? We want to do this early in the learning process to support comprehension throughout. And then we also want to think about our students' the lived lives. What kinds of activities like readings or media would really help my students to make these connections between their home language and English? Once you've identified these essential concepts or the big concept, you want to select resources to preview the topic in students' home language. In that resource document, we've provided you with a few that we are familiar with. Google Translate has gotten so much better. It's not perfect, but it is a place for us to start if we want to translate some text or some topics, big topics, essential questions. BrainPop Spanish, it is behind a paywall, but I know many school districts do subscribe to BrainPop, so that's an option as well. YouTube is how I found the video that I'm going to be sharing with you all today, a quick search of the video, and there's also real-time translation. So AI has gotten incredible with being able to provide translation in real time. So again, it's not perfect, but it allows us to really open up how we communicate and which languages we communicate with our students. So just like with the cognate instruction, building your toolbox of linguistic resources is one way that you can do this. So taking it slow and then building and adding on throughout every time you teach this lesson or every time you teach this unit. So the third step then is to preview the topic in your students' home languages. So it can include things like conversation and brainstorms with their peers, bilingual staff members in the building, and family members. And a lot of times I know people are thinking, how can we get family members in the building when they're working? Well, one thing you can do is to encourage your students to preview new text or topics in their home language at home. So if you send out emails or newsletters to parents and families before starting a new unit of study, maybe you ask them to talk with their children about a particular topic in their home language. So they're building this background of this academic language in their home language. It's going to help really develop a schema or sort of a background for your students to draw upon when you introduce the new concepts in English. Some topics are easier to do for this, of course, complex topics that families have never studied, especially US-centric topics like the US history, that might be difficult or impossible for some families to discuss at home. However, you can also include links to online media in the home language or send home articles or text in the home language if the parents are literate to relate to an upcoming unit of study. So that way families can watch and listen or read and then discuss together too. In addition, we can think about doing KWL charts in the home language, reading and listening to text in the home language, and using media like videos or podcasts. And with that KWL charts, the know, wonder, want to know, and learn, I know many of you are familiar with those, but of course we want to be very mindful that not all of our students, our multilingual students, can read or write in their first language, in their home language. So it might be important to think of this preview activity through listening, speaking, or viewing. Once we preview in the home language, then we view the text or the topics or the themes that we want to discuss in English. So when you're viewing in English, you want to refer back to those past home language conversations and brainstorms as you teach new content. You can display visuals or anchor charts of whole class brainstorms in your classroom. Make those explicit connections between what students have discussed in their home language and the new content they're learning in English. If you do keep a whole class KWL chart on chart paper in your classroom, maybe you refer to the K, the know, you're tapping into students' background, and the W, what they want to know in their first language or their home language. And then you and your students can update the L portion of the chart in the new content that's being learned in English, possibly. So then we're allowing students to really see the connections in the K and the W in the home language and the L in English. And you can revisit home language texts that you shared or audio or videos because you've already used the texts to build the background about the new content. Revisiting these resources as you come across those topics in more detail can really help tap into students' background knowledge. So unless you teach in a bilingual program, the new content you're going to be teaching will be in English. So reminding students of the background they've built in their home language as they learn the new content in English will aid in both comprehension and retention of material. And it'll also help your multilingual learners feel more confident and better prepared to participate during class conversations. And then finally, we review back in students' home language. So here you have your students review in their home language the new topic or text that they just learned or read about in English. And you can have students do this if you're a speaker, of course, with you, but with a partner, with other bilingual students, with a staff member, or even family members like we shared previously. So again, those steps are identify the most important background information students will need, select your resources that you're going to use to help students preview, and you preview the topic in the home language, view it in English, make those connections between the English and the home language, and then review back in students' home language. So I'm going to just kind of briefly walk you through what this might look like. And we're going to use the same Bookworms 3rd grade lesson that John started us off with in the cognates. So as we went through this process, I started out with what's the most important background information? And that didn't change from the cognate instruction. It's that the Constitution is a paper with power and rules. The way that I selected a resource for students is I just went on YouTube and I did a lot of searching because I don't have a library built up currently. It might take a little longer in the beginning, but as I keep these videos and I find really good videos, then I'm going to be able to build my resource library. But I wanted a video clip that built a foundation on the power and the limits of a constitution. So then I'm going to preview that video clip in Spanish. Then I'm going to share the text that was provided in Bookworms. It's a chapter book. It's just a shared reading of chapter 1. And then I'm going to go back and review in my students' home language. So I'll show the video one more time and engage my students in discussion. Okay, so here in this video clip, it is in Spanish, and Cucaracha decides to create his own constitution. So Lila, who's the human girl, shows him that he cannot do this, and a democratic constitution really has to be made by all of its citizens and not just one person or one bug. So really this video is going to build on the concept of how a constitution works for all of its citizens and doesn't let one person act as a dictator. So we'll just watch a couple, like just a brief little clip, just to kind of get an idea, but we're not going to watch the whole video. It's about 4 minutes.
Lo he terminado, pequeña Lila. He aquí el libro de leyes que todo bicho que se precie de tal deberá seguir a la pata de la letra.
¿Eso es algo así como tu constitución? A ver, léeme algo.
Artículo primero. De ahora en adelante, el amo y señor de este reino, o sea yo, deberá ser llamado Don Máximo Emperador Cucaracho el Guapo. Segundo, todas las cucarachas.
Okay, so this video, I've linked it in the shared resources for you, so you'll be able to access this if you'd like to watch it. Now, because I do have a background in Spanish, I was able to make sure that this video was appropriate. Of course, you would want to make sure that you do run it by a bilingual speaker before you just show media to your students, obviously, but I just wanted to let you know that we do want to be careful about what we do present with our students to make sure that it's actually appropriate. Okay, so with that said, after we preview it, then I'm going to view it in English. So this might be done in a small reading group in the back of the classroom or during Tier 1 instruction. I might use echo reading or choral reading. This is a grade level text, so I want to be sure that my students are successful reading. While we're reading, we're going to engage in discussion around the text. So Steve, if you click one time, hopefully it should. There we go. So these discussion questions are also from the curriculum, so I can use them to help support my students' comprehension while also building in my own discussion questions that are connecting specifically back to that video. Like, why did Laila tell Cucaracha that one person could not create a constitution? Or who created the US Constitution? And how is that different than what Cucaracha started to do? So really trying to make the connection explicit for my students. And then I'm going to review back in the home language. So I might have my students work with bilingual peers or staff members if I don't share in that home language to review the content and make those connections between English and Spanish. Or if I'm working on the KWL chart and I am, in this case, a Spanish speaker, I may be able to work with my students to complete the L section in both Spanish and English or whatever language they'd like to bring into the conversation. Okay, so just a few helpful tips. I would highly suggest you start slow, build your linguistic resources one item at a time. We'll start sharing today with our colleagues, so you'll have started a document. And I also suggest, if possible, to collaborate with the teachers in your building and really take advantage of the expertise that the content area teachers, the generalists, as well as the specialists bring to the classroom. Okay, so we're going to give this a try. So similar to the cognate instruction, if you go back to our shared document, and I can drop that back into the chat in just a minute. If you scroll down on that shared document, you're going to find the subtitle of preview, view, review. Again, we've listed a couple of sites to get you started. And then if you go to our shared list of resources where you can actually edit editable sounds weird. Sorry, the document that you can edit, you can go ahead and scroll down to that preview, view, review. And again, please feel free. Oh, I love this. We've already got an 11th grade on there. Awesome. Feel free to share some resources. Think about the unit you're working on. Maybe you want to start this next week. So think about where you are and what you might want to do. And while we give you a little bit of time to work here, we'll try to respond to some of the answers in the chat, and then we will come together in about 4 or 5 minutes to just wrap up and answer some more questions.
Oh, muted.
So as I see people building to our shared document, we can go ahead and take, if there's any questions, we have a couple of minutes. We've been trying to respond, but feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand and we'll try to respond to your questions.
So what?
Hi, Dr. Budde. I don't know if you can hear me.
I can.
It's nice to see you again. I think you presented once in one of my classes at UMD with Dr. Martin Beltran. So it's nice to see you.
You too.
We did have a question. So in a classroom where we have students that are speaking multiple languages, how do we integrate all the different languages so we're not confusing some of the students, or to ensure that we are not just focusing on one language or favoring one because the cognates? How do we do that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Grace. Thanks so much. And it's great to see you. I have a thought, but I would also love for others to chime in too, because we have such great expertise in this room right now. My original thought would be, if it's possible, I would want to think about having my students work in small groups. If I have access to multiple electronics, I can even show a video in that small group at a small table in that language and encourage that discussion. So it may be a bit noisy in the classroom or a bit chaotic, but if I'm able to have my students, work together with their peers that share a language. I would really love to see multiple languages. And that would be represented too, like all around the room with the anchor charts or posters or KWLs that you do create as a class in the classroom. We might see multiple languages, and maybe that's like using different colors to represent languages if we're working with younger children. So visually they're beginning to see like this is Spanish or this is Haitian Creole or whatever it might be. So that's one way to get started. Does anyone else have any suggestions for Grace about multiple languages? I saw that question also come up in the chat too. I'd love to hear. Olinda? Linda, I see you have your hand raised. Did you have something to add or share?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I thought I was speaking to myself because I was mute. Sorry.
No
Hold
problem.
on 1 second. Let me move to a space where okay, this is quieter. Yes, I was talking about the fact that as technology advances, now we're blessed with tools that we didn't have. I didn't have that when I learned English. So Google Docs, Slides, Google Slides have the options for translating in multiple languages. But I'm just going to repeat something that one time when my school was audited by the US Department of Education, the auditor saw that I wasn't using Spanish, which is my first language, to help my students. And when she asked me, why are you not using it? I mentioned to her, it's because I have a split population. Half of my students are Haitians, half of my students are Hispanic. So I feel bad for my Haitian students because I cannot help them as much as I could help my students. So she told me this question kind of shifted my mind because she told me, so you are telling me that you have a tool in your hands that you can use and you are willingly choosing not to. And I was like, I was just flabbergasted because I never thought about it like that. And so luckily for me, in the school where I work, I mean, I know that's different for other districts, but in the school where I work, 99% of my population is Hispanic. And I do preview with them. Unfortunately, I don't have that much time. So sometimes the teachers share their lessons with me. So I know what lesson is coming and I am able to find some resources to build a little bit of background knowledge. So when these kids receive the lesson from the teacher, they are not completely lost. And so what works for me is, for example, especially in science, I know that the title of the lesson the teacher is going to teach, I don't need to use Google Translate, but I can see how other teachers might have to. Exactly the same lesson. I translated the title in Spanish, I put it on YouTube, and it usually comes with videos that I have to kind of screen to see that they are not too heavy because a lot of my students are like, you know, their Spanish is not all that strong. So I choose one that is kind of like kid friendly or whatnot, and I send it to them and I said, look, your homework this afternoon when you're at home is to watch this video because the teacher is going to talk about electromagnetic waves tomorrow. And I don't want you to be completely lost. And so when they realize that these videos are actually going to help them more and more, now they are like, oh, okay, Miss, I watched the video. And I said, perfect. So when I go in the classroom, when I am pushing in and I go, we are kind of talking the same language. We're using the same terms. We're using magnetic waves, we're using mechanic waves, and now they know what I am talking about. And that is such a good feeling.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a wonderful, thank you so much for sharing. And I think, Alina, that's so important that when that auditor presented you with the question that we may have certain tools available to meet the needs of certain students. That's one place to start. And like you said, over time, you can continue to build the resources, build your understanding in different languages as well. And I love that you shared that with us. Thank you so much for your expertise.
Thank you, guys.
Steve, do you mind just stop sharing the screen for a moment here? I think there we go, so we can all see each other. There was a question I saw a couple of people had in the chat that I'll bring up quickly. It was from Jennifer. She said, question we've discussed multiple times, but we can't seem to find a definitive answer. When it comes to teaching phonemic awareness, would it make the most sense to teach this in the L1, especially with kindergarten ML students or younger newcomer students? Note, our students primarily speak Spanish. So John or Steve, did you want to touch that?
Yeah, I was going to say I'm happy to get started on that, and John, you may want to jump in as well. I think this is a great question, and I first want to say that the jury's still out on the best way to teach phonemic awareness for English speaking students. So I want to just start there and say one of the things that seems to have come out in a lot of the recent work on phonemic awareness is that teaching with letters is actually most beneficial for students, and that teaching only orally with no letters for phonemic awareness may work for students, but only for a limited time. And any lessons after, a certain amount of time, I think it's like 8 to 10 hours, actually don't have any returns on them. So that's one thing. So as you're thinking about this, I think one of the things we know is that there's a relationship between Spanish phonemic awareness and English phonemic awareness. So students who are taught phonemic awareness in Spanish, that skill can transfer to English. The challenge is that how do you teach students to facilitate that transfer? And this is something I know that John has been really thinking about and working on. So for me, as I think about that, and I'm just going to throw out an example here, I don't have any materials with me, but if I had letters, I would use them. But let's say like you did a couple of phonemic awareness activities like say it, move it, or something like that with Spanish words. So if you started like with the word casa, right? And you were like, we're looking at the sounds, k, ah, s, ah, right? And you have manipulatives that are letters that show that. Then the trick, I think the key part is if you teach in Spanish, then to help students make that transfer to English. So what we want to do at that point is say, look, just the way we did casa, we could do this word top in English, right? And we could do t, ah, the same way and show the letters that go with it. And so I think what's really important is, so I think the short answer for me, Jennifer, to your question is, yes, you could teach it in Spanish, but make sure that you also explicitly help students make the transfer to English. John, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would just like to echo what you said. So we know that Spanish and English phonemic awareness are closely related, but then we also know that research is showing that we should be teaching with letters. So I just really want to echo that when we are working on this transfer, that we think about the sounds and letters that might be different and support students with those as well. But then also highlighting the similarities for them so they can see those connections, I think is also really important as well.
Well, I do want to thank all of you for joining us today, this afternoon. This was such a wonderful session, and I really appreciate all of you sharing your time and your expertise with us. Like I said, you'll be able to access these Google Docs, so if you would like to keep adding to them, please do. Please keep building your linguistic toolbox. And if you have a few questions, we can hang on for a couple more minutes, but otherwise, I hope you enjoy your the rest of this conference. It's so fabulous, and it's been great seeing everybody.
I just put up our contact info right at the end. If you want to grab an email address or anything, if you wanted to follow up with any questions.
Grace, are you teaching in Delaware now? Are you still in Maryland?
I recently just relocated here to Delaware. So yes, I would love to connect.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Hi, Amanda. You're
sorry,
back
my
in the
volume's off
States. You're
'cause we were in a
teaching.
room sharing volume. Okay, there we go. Hello.
Hi, where are you teaching?
I'm in the Smyrna School District teaching at a middle school and intermediate school.
Wonderful. Yana May was one of my former students. It's so great to see her.
Nice to see you.
Exciting.
Hi, Buddy. Hi,
Hi,
Dr. Buddy.
Jesse. I
How are
didn't
you?
recognize you. Another one of my students. It's so great to see you.
But yeah, just wanted to pop on and say hi. The session was really great. Thanks for those resources.
Oh, thank you for attending. It's so great to see you both. Best of luck for the rest of your school year.
Oh,
Thank you.
Did anyone have any final questions or before we log off here today? Thank you all for attending.
I apologize for my slide management. I never use Google Slides, and yeah, as you could see, like every time I touched it, the slide advanced or went backwards. I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing here.
I think you did a great job. So
You did.
thank you for doing that.
It was last minute because I couldn't get mine to share at all. Like, I don't know what I was doing, but I wasn't able to. It's on my, I have the dual monitor set up. And for whatever reason, I was having trouble accessing it and I started to panic. So thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh no, that's fine. I don't mind at all. I wasn't very, I would have prepared more if
Yeah. So I'm so sorry. Thank you for just
Yeah,
taking
no,
over
no.
that. Oh.
Yeah, I've also had issues with the dual monitor, like with it being on the other screen or like not showing up if it's on it. I don't know.
Yeah, I did
Gotta
end up,
figure that
and I
out.
know you could see like the top of my window, like in the thing, instead of it being totally full screen. And I was like, I can't make it totally full screen because I can't see anything else. So, yeah.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for doing that. I'm sorry to throw that on you.
Yeah.
Oh no, not a problem. Oh, not a problem.
All right.
All right.
Okay.
All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't see any last questions. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks.